by a buyer in various situations. It is often helpful to understand the behavior of the DMU based on the situations. That means a very unique situation will force the DMU to behave in a different way. If it is a normal running process where the buyer is actually very comfortable with this current level of suppliers, the DMU may then not let go or may not feel like compromising on any of the parameters which they've been asked to check the supplier's performance on. However, there are many situations where the ideal conditions do not exist. But there are also situations where the DMU is not even active enough. That means from their point of view, there is no need to look for any supplier. But it is the point of view of a supplier who needs to enter the supply chain, that is the point which may activate the DMU. There are many places where one looks on the net, you will find that we are looking for suppliers, we're looking for suppliers. And this thing is perpetually on. That means there is a DMU existing and they're constantly looking for better suppliers. If you then try and understand why are these people looking for a better supplier, and then structure your proposal based on this, the chances of you making sense to the DMU is higher. However, let's take a point of purchasing person. Whenever a purchasing person tries to look for a new source, he is actually looking at it from the point of low cost of purchase. Many times, the supplier's delivery schedule is also not in his control. Due to the presence of high-end IT systems, many of the delivery schedules get generated by the production planning department and it's sent to the supplier. So, if supplier's performance or uniqueness has to be propped up by the purchasing department, he will look for something which is very, very substantial. That means it has to look good from his point of view, as well as not prove the other three aspects of DMU any worse. That means the current level of performance on the other three parameters, that means the production department, the product development department, and the quality department. All the KRAs of these departments will naturally have to be met, and there has to be a substantial jump or substantial improvement in the purchasing person's KRA that can force him to activate the DMU. So he becomes the influencer. But when he becomes the influencer, he will try and follow a pattern. That means if he is activating because he knows that the current source is not good enough, that means very soon the current source may find a better option than them and defect, or very soon the current source may go bust, or very soon the capability of the current source to supply the quantities will go down, because he is the one who is actually in direct contact with the supplier. Constant supplier reviews are done by him, and he is constantly monitoring the performance, because finally when it comes down to price negotiations, he uses all these aspects to influence the supplier and to negotiate the price downwards. Whenever there is a DMU working, it is advisable that one develops enough relationship with all the four aspects of buying and prove to all four aspects the capabilities. Just because you are going to charge less, that does not make you fit enough to enter a supply chain. Because if there is going to be a deviation in quality or your quality is susceptible, you will suffer a huge loss. Because after that, the DMU then comes into the purview of penalties. Everything okay when we selected you, and after that, if you did not perform the way, that means you deviated from the processes. So please be aware that the reason why DMU exists is to make sure that before you start supplying, your capabilities have been well assessed, proven, and then you start supplying. And hence, any deviation from the required standards or you falling to supply at requisite quality levels will be squarely blamed on you. That means the reason why your buyer got bad quality was one of the processes was violated at your works. This existence of DMU in a supply chain is what actually binds a supply chain together. This is also a way where top tier suppliers are able to send technology, improvements in processes and learnings down the supply chain. So suddenly it is no more a buyer-seller relationship. That means you're not governed by only the purchasing department. You're also attached to the other three aspects of the product, which is quality, delivery, and technology. This is how the supply chains then become stronger. The role of DMU is what integrates the supply chain on more than one aspects, and hence the bond is much stronger. Let's look at another aspect of supply chain, which is nothing but reliability of supply. The risks to disturbance in supply are many. And as we know that even a small supplier, if it does not supply on time, could lead to a big disruption in the assembly of the final product. Whether it is automobile line or electronics line or garment line or regular supermarket chain, a small failure at a small or a weak link can cause the failure of the whole supply chain. In the DMU, we just learned that there are at least four aspects in play when a supplier gets selected. The purchasing part, it was commonly understood, had more than two sources so that they could actually negotiate the price. However, in supply chain, this is only 25% of the total impact on the decision. So why is it that we have two suppliers or three suppliers? At least in the beginning, more than 2-3 suppliers are constantly required so that you can have a competition. That means the suppliers do not ask for outlandish price because there's enough quantity to be supplied. That means there is no supply side constraint. And then a fair discussion can take place. But if there are 20, that means there's a large difference between the supply side and the demand side. Again, it's not a fair discussion. So usually what happens, the DMU with his proper action, manages to keep a fair amount of suppliers in contention for the order. The reason why we need to have more than one supplier is also to make sure that disruptions to supply are quickly restored. Naturally, the share of business depends on the price quoted by the individual suppliers. So if you quote very low, the chances are that you may get a higher volume while keeping the other aspects of the product same. But while you have managed to make sure that the supply is not at risk, other things come into play. The parts traceability. How do we know which manufacturer's item was assembled into which subassembly? And in case there is a problem, where do we begin? Do we begin tracing it back to both the suppliers and start working on both the suppliers, or do we have an ability to actually very simply move out one and focus on the other? Secondly, we do have the same item number because they're both essentially making the same component. So you have one item number that gets stored together or gets assembled together, and it's come from two sources. And we know two different sources means the difference in at least a few of the variables that are in play. Traceability becomes a big job. So if we have to focus on improvement, you have to again go focus on improvement on both the jobs. So while having two supplying source is good to secure the delivery part, the improvement part and the focus part and the managing part becomes tougher. In the managing part, I talk about the billing part. Until recently, what used to happen is there's one component being supplied, let us say it's been consumed, it comes from two sources, so we have to identify which one supplied what quantity, and then you raise a bill based on that. That means you make the payment to the vendor based on that. This was also causing extra work, but current systems allow you to very easily pay the dues whenever you want. However, look at it from one point of view, that if you have a source which is cheaper than the other, why not use only that source? But if you only keep using that source, the one which is not supplying at all will actually use that capacity, or for that matter, the technology to manufacture something else. Talking about technology, the reason why this source got selected was he had better methods and processes. That means his ability to produce the product was much better than the other one. So by the end of the cycle of this product, you would have two vendors which started off with the same technology. One improved because of his constant use and supply, the other did not improve. That means when the next time you have to call for an order, the chances are that only one of the two suppliers will be available to bid. That means you have created a monopoly situation on the supply side. If you